Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. As always, we thank our patrons for making this podcast possible. And we want to remind you that we have a $50 tier that is called the Book Club tier. And we just held our second Zoom meeting. And we take questions from people. There's a form. They fill out the form beforehand. They can ask any question, and we kind of follow the chapter topics in my book. And we're going to talk about all things abuse, from wrestling with your faith to wrestling with your childhood to identity crisis, on and on and on. So it's really good.
It's an
enjoy it.
In-depth discussion, as deep as you all want it. You get to present the questions, and we get to see the questions prior to the hour with you, and we love it. We absolutely love this
rich
interaction. Yes, yeah. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for this week's podcast, there was an article that was posted on my Facebook page, the Jimmy Hinton Author Facebook page, and it was an article I had written a while ago, or a post I had written a while ago about the tells of abusers and kind of picking up on those tells. And in that, I referenced an article or a post. I keep calling them articles. They're posts, blog posts, that I'd written actually 3 years ago this month on testing versus grooming. And that was probably one of my most popular posts that I had ever written. And I talk about this a lot, and this is not my idea, so it's not unique, but I've never heard anybody really flesh it out. I've never heard them talk at depth about this. So I talk a lot about that, and I think it's really important to understand that abusers primarily test their victims. They don't primarily groom their victims. And I'll talk about, I know that like right now people are cringing and probably...
Well, in this blog post, which you'll have linked at the end of this,
yeah.
You really take that apart and you explain it very, very well. I know I used to use the word, prior to the tells, all the time, the testing, prior to testing. I used all the other words that everybody else used.
Oh, I used to talk about grooming behavior
right.
too, yeah,
grooming.
All the time, and I don't anymore.
Every book that I picked up always used the word grooming.
Yeah.
And, that seemed like a natural, that was the right word to use.
Yeah.
But now, once you have unpacked this so well, I get it. And I didn't get it at first either.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, when I talk about testing, I'm sort of talking about grooming, but I think that terminology falls short, and I think terminology is really important. It's really important to get this right, to understand the techniques of abusers. If we miss the terminology even by a little bit, I think we really fail to understand the techniques that abusers use. And for me, part of my training is teaching people what techniques the abusers use step by step. It's kind of like creating a manual saying, this is how they do it. This is how they view
the thinking
parents
process.
and the
how
kids.
Does it
and
begin? Yeah.
How do they know that they're getting away with this?
Right.
And I specialize in abuse in plain sight, which is incredibly far more common than the research suggests. And the question in my mind was always, when abusers are abusing their victims, when Larry Nassar, people like Larry Nassar and my dad, and thousands and thousands and thousands of abusers, they're actually having hands-on victims in front of parents. How do they know that they're getting away with it? Because in my mind, I'd be freaking out.
Oh my goodness, yes.
If I was doing anything that was a felony crime, in front of other people where I could, it's in broad daylight, I'd be a nervous wreck. I'd be
And
terrified.
at first,
And they're not.
I used to balk at that idea of the abuse in plain sight
Mm-hmm.
until I really, really dove into this with you, and then actually hearing that abusers from your dad,
Mm-hmm.
seeing the Nasser case and how he manipulated
Mm-hmm.
and used and abused in front of these parents that were sitting right in the room,
Yes.
right next to him, and how he was able to stay cool, calm, and collected as he was abusing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let me talk. I mean, let me talk about that for a second, because the abusers, well, the people who research abusers, what they would write about in these books, and I saw this over and over and over again, is they would talk about abuse in plain sight, but they would just kind of gloss over it, and they
Right.
would say, well, something to the effect of, well, abusers even get so brazen that they'll begin to abuse their victims in front of their parents, and then they just kind of move on. And I'm like, wait a second, this
Right.
is
Excuse
huge.
me.
If they're abusing their victims, in my mind, this is what came up. If they're abusing their victims in front of the parents, if they're doing something that high risk, that's not accidental. It's not like they can't
Oh, no.
control
Oh,
themselves.
yeah.
It's the polar opposite. It's extreme control. So I wanted to know, one, kind of why they do it, but that was secondary to the question how do they do it? Because if we understand the how, it makes it so much easier for us to spot abuse before it happens if we understand what these testing techniques are. So let me talk about terminology here. I have terminology, and then you jump in at any time. I mean,
Okay,
you
yeah.
have stuff highlighted from that
Jimmy,
blog
I
post.
loved the explanation you give at the very beginning.
Yeah, so
I love that, and I think I would urge everyone to go to this article.
Yeah, and I'll
this
link to it
blog
in the
post,
description
and
of
read
this.
it.
Yeah.
It's excellent. It really is.
So Merriam-Webster's definition of groom is, the verb form is to get into readiness for a specific objective, to prepare. Okay, test, on the other hand, is to make a preliminary test or survey as of a reaction or interest before embarking on a course of action. So I know it sounds so subtle that some of you are like, well, I don't even really hear a difference. Well, to groom is to get somebody into readiness for a specific objective, to prepare them. Interestingly, I looked in multiple different dictionaries. Groom is never used. The verb form of groom is never used in a negative connotation. It's
That's
always
very
positive.
interesting,
I
yeah.
groom my kids to get ready for school.
Right.
It's always, you're improving the quality of life for the person
Well, when I think
or
of
animal
grooming,
that you groom.
the
You
way-
groom an animal. You
Right.
know?
Or we groom, we fix our hair,
Mm-hmm.
we do our makeup, we are grooming here, we are preparing maybe for a public presentation,
Mm-hmm.
we're preparing to go to school or go to work, we are preparing.
Yeah.
But when it talks about testing, that I think is quite interesting, because before I get a new hairdo, I might want to test it out by showing pictures in a magazine
Mm-hmm.
and saying, what do you think I'd look like in this before the actual grooming begins?
Yeah.
And-
so
and it's
not
different.
Not
It's
that
different.
grooming doesn't happen, but grooming
Right.
doesn't primarily happen. And here's the other thing too.
Mm-hmm.
You hear about grooming, this grooming process, and it could take months. It could take weeks
Mm-hmm.
or months or sometimes even years to groom a child and to groom the community. And I hear this over and over and over in advocacy. I read about it in the research books on pedophilia and different sexual abuse, and they all talk about grooming communities to really think that you're somebody who's respectful or you're this person of authority. You don't have to do that.
Right. I was going to say.
Abusers don't
Right.
have to convince their
Right.
victims, their young victims, that they're trustworthy.
Right.
Abusers, my dad never had to convince people. He didn't have to groom a community into thinking he was trustworthy. He was just trustworthy.
He was.
Right? It's not like
really was.
It's not like he was this undependable
No.
person who switched personas and then worked to convince people that he was trustworthy. He was reliable as
Part of his
as the day is
character
long.
was his trustworthiness. He was always there.
He was so
there.
consistent.
He was, yes.
Always.
Yes.
For anybody.
Yeah.
Whether he was abusing somebody or not. He was just a very reliable person. He was reliable at work. He was reliable at church. He was reliable in the home. He was reliable everywhere he went. There are always exceptions to these rules, but generally speaking, Larry Nassar didn't have to convince people, groom the parents into thinking he was trustworthy.
Not at all.
He was a world-renowned doctor.
Absolutely.
He didn't groom the
Trusted,
parents.
respected,
No,
revered, had a high position of authority because he deserved it, actually, in that field.
So testing, on the other hand, is to make a preliminary test or survey. This is how they know that they can get away with it with their specific victims that they target. So to make a preliminary test or survey, as of a reaction or interest, it's a touch on the shoulder. Does the child pull away or shrink back? Does the parent say, "What are you doing?" It's this preliminary test or survey as of a reaction, both for the child and for the adult, before embarking on a course of action. They already know what the end game is. They already know how they're going to get there. They just have to test their victims and find out, can I get away with it?
I watched these little TikTok clips come on Facebook. And
Granny, I didn't know you were a TikToker.
I don't have the app. They just come through. They're like real quick ones. And this one was of this mom getting her little girl's ears pierced. And the test was, the lady stood behind her with mom right here with the child on the lap. And the lady touched the machine, the little machine, that staple gun, next to the little girl's ear. And she said, to the effect was, "There, that didn't hurt, did it?" And the little girl says, "No." And at that point, mom is smiling, holding and kind of kissing the little girl's head. And then the lady with the equipment goes, boom. And there's the earring in.
Yeah.
She did the test first. And the little girl, I mean, she's momentarily shocked. Mom didn't even know it was done yet. But there was no reaction because there was a test done first.
Right.
And
That's right.
Yeah.
So, I of course talk about magicians a lot. And, and I want to point to, I'm going to put this in the description too, or I'll put it somewhere in the YouTube video. I'll implant that somewhere, but excuse me. On my website, jimmyhinton.org, I have 2 training videos that I did with Dr. Stephen Macknik and Susanna Martinez-Conde, and they're neuroscientists.
Excellent, by the way, yeah.
And they specialize on visual deception. How the brain, they really study how the brain misses certain things that are right in front of them, or how the brain sees things that aren't in front of them, and kind of what that process is within the brain itself, and our way of thinking. Phenomenal video. And I'm not saying that because I was part of that. In fact, they did the majority of the training. They did most of that training. It was excellent. It blew me
away
good.
As to how our minds perceive things, and we think we're actually seeing something that we didn't see.
And so that's what we need to do, is switch the perspective. Instead of looking for these red flag behaviors and this grooming behavior and these long drawn out 7-8 month grooming patterns with abusers, instead of trying to tediously look for that, I start with the assumption that, number one, abuse happens really quick.
I think so, yeah.
Really quick.
Not I think, I mean, I know so, yeah.
2, abusers are highly skilled. 3, they have a whole arsenal of tricks up their sleeves. And if they start down a path, we use the word dynamic from our good friend Jim, who he talks about how some of these trainings are so static. It's the grooming behaviors that never change. They've been the same since like the 1970s, and they've not changed a bit. Abusers are very dynamic, much like the magician. They can change on a dime. They still know what the end result is. They know the trick that they're going to pull. And if somebody's catching on to them, they don't abandon the trick, halfway through it. They still meet their goal. They reach their goal. They just take a different avenue to get there.
They pull another trick out of the bag.
Testing.
They do it a different
They're reading
way.
people
Right.
Constantly. They're testing people through a whole bunch of different series. And so I think this is the big difference, and this is why it's so important to me, because grooming just falls short. It falls so short. And if we're looking for these grooming behaviors, we're going to be light years behind abusers always. So I wanted to talk about in here, and I'm not picking on Darkness Delight. I think they do incredible work, but here's how they describe grooming. This is this is on their website, Darkness Delight. They describe grooming this way. Grooming is a process by which offenders gradually draw victims into a sexual relationship. I want to stop there. This is not a relationship. A relationship is a two-way street.
Right.
A relationship is a give and take.
Yeah.
This is abuse. This is a one-way street. This is somebody having control from the very beginning. They know the end game. They know how they're going to get there. And now they begin that series of testing, and it happens quick.
Right.
So, again, they say grooming is a process by which offenders gradually draw victims into a sexual relationship and maintain that relationship in secrecy. Well, what does that imply? That none of this is out in the open, that it's all done in secrecy, that, and that's not true at all. At the same time, offenders may also fill roles within the victims' families that make them trusted and valued family friends. And here it is. It's that idea that they're grooming the parents to think that they're trustworthy, and they're slowly manipulating the family into thinking that they're friends. That's not how it works. They're just friends with them.
Yeah.
That's it.
I was just going to say.
Period.
They are. They're friends. Yeah. They've been, lots of times they've been a family friend for years and years.
That's exactly right.
And this process of a long grooming session, I think of what your dad said when he stood in court the day he was being sentenced, and the judge asked, when was the first time you abused a child? And what was it your dad said? He said, I was 14 years old, saw a little girl around 4 or 5 walking down the road, and I abused her. He didn't have any time to groom.
Right.
No time. Now, I'm sure he did some kind of a little test there. Is she going to scream? Is she going to kick and holler? What will she do? Probably called her over, talked to her for a minute, offered her maybe a lollipop or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a period of time like months. It was done. That was it. It was done.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. He didn't say that he was alone, but, it's quite possible there may have been someone else with him. We don't know that.
Right. Well, I want to go on because, these are the red 5 behaviors that they list on Darkness Delight. They say, number 1, targeting specific kids for specific attention, activities, or gifts. There it is again. It's this buying them off. And, of course, abusers do give gifts. But as my dad said in a letter, he's like, I gave everybody gifts. He's like, in fact, I went out of my way not to just give gifts to my victims because he's like, I would have looked like a creep. He's like, everybody would have been looking at me.
He carried gifts around, if I remember properly, and he had them at church and gave them to all the kids.
Yeah. Some offenders show preference for a particular gender, age, or type. And that's very true. Very, very true. But that's not grooming.
Right.
That's just a preference. That has nothing to do with grooming or testing.
No.
Number 2, slowly isolating a kid from family members and friends, physically and emotionally. This could include finding reasons for isolated one-on-one interactions, sleepovers, camping trips, day activities, etc., or undermining relationships with parents and friends to show that no one understands you like I do. I agree. I agree with that statement. And I would say maybe that could be classified as grooming, but I still would probably prefer to classify that as testing. It's seeing how far can I go? How far can I kick that boundary stone? And will the parents be okay with me taking their kid on a camping trip? But if they're not, like you said, I'm going to make them be okay with it. Oh,
heck yeah. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. And
that's through testing, through knowing what their belief system is, where are their weak points, their weak links, how can I pull on their heartstrings and and manipulate them into
You're
a
so
yes.
tired. Can I just, I'll take the kids for a little bit and
That's right.
babysit for 2 hours and give you a break.
That's right.
2 hours turns into 4, 4 into a whole afternoon / evening, into overnight finally.
That's right.
Yeah.
Number 3, gradually crossing physical boundaries. Full frontal hugs that last too long, making kids sit in their laps, accidental touches of private areas. All these are causes for concern. In some cases, offenders have engaged in partially clothed tickle sessions, showered with kids, or slept in the same bed with them. Again, this is not grooming behavior. This is testing behavior.
Right.
And this is how abusers get away with abuse in plain sight, just like the magician gets away with the magic trick in front of an audience full of people. Magicians don't slowly groom a whole audience full of people over a months-long process into thinking they're trustworthy and, on and on and on. Their tricks happen so
I was just going
quickly.
to say it's speed. Yeah. The whole thing is
And
speed.
when they pull somebody on stage,
That blows me away.
they know
that they can do it.
they know who
Yeah.
the right
Oh,
people
yeah.
and the wrong people are to pull up on stage.
I
through
imagine
testing.
they can tell even by watching body posture in
Absolutely,
a chair,
they can.
reaction to their first couple tricks. How does that person react when they do this, and this? They can tell.
Yeah.
They study people.
Yeah. Apollo Robbins is hands down my favorite close-up magician, and he's known as the world's best pickpocket. He's fantastic. He's collaborated with doctors Macknik, Stephen Macknik, and Susanna Martinez-Conde, and just a phenomenal guy. And he's so good at what he does. And when I do trainings, I show a TED video that Apollo Robbins did. It's an 8-minute video. He walks into the audience, and he shakes hands with 3 different people. And the third person, the first 2, he just kind of keeps going. And the third person, he's like, "Come on up, Joe." So
love it.
when I do
know.
trainings,
Yeah.
I pause the video and I'm like, okay, I asked the audience, why did he reject the first 2? What was it about them? And what was Apollo's process for knowing that those 2 were not good candidates to fool? And very, 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 very rarely, it's not without exception because there have been a couple times, but very rarely do people have a clue, and they're like, I don't know, I have no idea. Maybe he just saw a look on their face. And so we go back and I show them step by step what he's doing. He touches the one lady on the shoulder. He orders the one guy to stand up, and the guy just like looks at him like, I'm not standing up for you.
So good. Those videos are
And the guy
so
finally
good.
reluctantly stands up. And when Apollo sticks his hand out to shake his hand, the guy's like, he really hesitates. And then he like reluctantly and kind of angrily puts his hand out and is like, whatever, dude. And Apollo's like, okay, good. Moves on. And then he, does the same thing to a woman. And the first thing she does, he goes in to shake her hand, and she physically leans back. And those are the little subtle things that,
I was
unless you're
just going to
trained,
say,
you'll never notice.
those are telling. Those are the things that are telling. They tell a story. They tell what you can get away with that person.
That's right.
Absolutely. How far away can you stay to that person? How close can you get to
That's
that
right.
person? Does that person look you in the eyes, or are their eyes looking over there?
That's right.
Yeah, all of that.
What jokes can you get away with? How far can you push the boundaries on that? How vulgar can you get with somebody? That's all tested.
The whole ball of wax, but they've studied every detail and know how to predict our behaviors before we do our behaviors.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's so quick. And he spends maybe 30 seconds max with each one of those people.
Now,
30 seconds max.
People might be wondering, okay, how do you deal with this with a child? Same thing. Child's
Absolutely.
behaviors are pretty
That's right.
predictable.
So-
They really are.
So what they'll do, I'm not going to have time. I mean, the fourth and final one is engaging a kid. This is red flag behaviors on darkness light, but engaging a kid to keep secrets from family members. The shame and fear associated with child sexual abuse make it easy for offenders to enforce secrecy in this area as well, keeping abuse just between us. Again, that's not grooming behaviors. That's just after the fact. I would classify that as a threat.
I was going to
Don't
say
tell
that's
anybody.
fear. That's
Yeah,
fear.
that's not
And
grooming.
often there is a threat with that. Don't tell. Don't tell, or this will
That's
happen
right.
to you. Don't tell, or this will
That's right.
happen to your mommy, or,
And by
on
the way, they
on.
only do that for certain victims
Right,
of theirs. They
right,
know,
they know.
through testing which victims
Right.
those
Would
threats
wanna
work.
tell.
Because some kids will be like, "Don't tell.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell everybody." So they know
Yeah.
that for certain victims, what works is, like my dad telling one of his victims, if you tell anybody, I would be so heartbroken that I would take my car and wrap it
Yeah.
around a telephone
Yep.
pole.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
the reality is he'd never in a million years
No.
do that, but he knew
No.
that that would work with that specific
With that
specific
child.
victim.
Right.
And he never did that to any of his other victims. It was just that one victim.
Right.
So, they know what works for each victim through testing. They test
Right,
them.
right.
So the physical testing, and what I do at trainings is I show people, I'll invite somebody up, a volunteer who is not a sexual abuse victim or survivor, preferably somebody of the same sex, and I'll just show them like a touch on the shoulder. It's just they'll have the child stand beside them, and it'll be so benign. It's nothing sexual.
Yeah.
It's a touch on
No.
the shoulder
Yeah.
as they're talking to the parents, and what they're testing for is to see, does the kid kind of shrink back,
away. Does
and they're
that-
watching
yeah.
the eyes of the parent.
Yep.
Does the parent's eyes keep going to
Both.
my hand,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
can I maintain the spotlight of attention? That's what doctors Macknik and Martinez-Conde call it. Our spotlight of attention is only the size of our thumbnail, and if you stick it out at arm's length, if you follow that around, that is literally the size of our spotlight
That
of
we
attention.
see.
Everything
Right,
outside
right.
of that is this gray area. It's ambiguous.
That blew me away, just learning that.
Yes.
That totally blew me away.
Me too.
Really did.
Me too. And you can see it with Apollo Robbins when he pulls Joe up on stage, and he literally cleans the man
Oh, yeah.
out.
That is
Empties his pockets,
incredible.
takes his watch.
Incredible.
Strips
It really
him
is.
bare.
Yeah. Yes.
And Joe
Yes.
is clueless.
Right.
Because Apollo, he's maintaining Joe's spotlight of attention.
I think it's difficult for us to just get it, because we don't want to think that people are that crafty, experienced, talented,
Yes.
that they can do that to us, and we might be thinking that could never happen to me,
That's right.
or that would never happen to my child. My kid is afraid of every stranger. My kid would scream. My kid, How many?
Tell that to the hundreds
yeah.
of parents of victims that Larry Nassar abused
Right.
while they were in the same room as their child.
Exactly. And I keep thinking, I just read an account a few days ago of how Nassar, he just by changing his position a little bit, he blocked the view of the mother, and the person laying on the table never flinched.
Yeah.
Because he was so convincing that that was part of the exam. And Mom is sitting right here, after all. Mom is right by me. keeping
One
me
of the
safe.
mothers actually walked up, and she said, I think I have this in this blog post that,
You
that I
do.
wrote.
You
but
have an
yeah,
account
Deb
of
McCall.
that.
So
Yeah.
Deb McCall, here's a direct quote from her. She said, I wasn't somebody with like my nose in the phone, McCall says. I was having conversations with them, both her
Them,
daughter,
yep.
as she's
the
being
exam-
abused.
Right, yeah.
And Larry Nassar. And she said, whenever Larry was doing something in that pelvic area, I would go up and stand by the table because I wanted her to feel more comfortable. So she would go up, and not only was Larry not intimidated by that, he was invited. He was like, yeah, come on up. And he still abused Deb McCall's
it's
daughter.
awful, and I don't
with her
think,
standing there.
Yeah, I don't think we can comprehend what that does to the victim of abuse either, because they think they're being protected and being safe. Abuse isn't on their radar, and then to realize afterward, can you imagine how? I mean,
No, and there are a
awful.
couple op-eds that were written
Awful.
by parents of the victims of Larry Nassar's, and I'm telling you, it is heart-wrenching.
It is.
And they say,
It
like,
really is.
we had people writing us, giving us death threats, saying that we're bad parents, that we wanted our kids to be abused. How could you stand there and watch your kid? Nobody could stand there and be in the same room and not see their kid being abused. Well, they don't understand
Right, they don't get
science.
it.
They don't
get it,
understand
right.
abusers. They don't understand techniques. They don't understand how testing works. I'm telling you, Unless you are really, really, really trained, you will miss it every single
You use
time.
the words over and over again that these abusers are highly skilled. And I
Yes.
think we need to
The
be
vast
reminded
majority.
of that, Jimmy, over and over and over again. They have studied people, they have studied this eye, what the eye can see. They've studied it all. They know. And
Yeah.
that just proves again how intentional their actions are.
Yeah, it's
They're-
anything but
Right.
accidental. And
There's no accident about it.
and
Right.
that testing is so important. It's important to get that difference because, again, they know what the end game is. They know which victims they want to abuse, but that doesn't mean those are the victims.
That
They're
they
the
will.
victims that they will
Right.
abuse because they're going to do these series of testing, and they have to do it ends up being a matching game, and they have to know not only is the child gonna pass the test, so to speak, is the child able to be abused and me get away with it, but they have to match that victim to the right parents and say, can I pull this off with the parents, or are they going to be kind of
And that's
a
where
ton of-
that's where I think we transpose the word grooming. We get a little gray about the grooming with the parents. No, they're testing parents constantly, constantly testing the parents
Yes.
also.
and education level doesn't matter.
Right? No, not at all.
Socioeconomic status doesn't matter. Like, those things do not matter to an abuser. And if you don't believe me, again, look at magicians.
Oh yeah.
They can take the most educated people in their audience and they can run circles around them. It's
I think
all
they
about
love doing
technique.
that too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
education has nothing to do with it. Your education level. And so, we need to erase that idea that they're slowly grooming people into trusting them, and that it's this months or even years long process. And
Don't we
it
do
just
that
doesn't
though?
work
Don't
that
don't
way.
we teach that to our kids sometimes too? I still remember the girls coming home, telling about a teacher, excuse me, staring down their shirts and said the whole school, all the girls would talk about it, and I said, I think you're being silly. You're being over dramatic about it. He wouldn't do that. He really wouldn't do that all the time.
But he did it and I know that teacher. He did it in front of all of us students. He would rub girls' only
And
girls,
come up-
never
right.
boys.
Yep.
But he would rub their
Right.
shoulders and push their shirts down.
Yes.
And I know as a kid looking back now, I'm like, well, why didn't I say anything?
We did,
but he
honestly,
knew.
yes.
Like, that was all part of that testing too. It's intentionally doing it. It's not like it was accidental. That was very intentional.
And even if somebody did say anything, it would be
It was
kind of-
benign enough.
Yeah,
that he
it-
wasn't putting his hand down
right,
their shirts.
right. And
He
it
could
could
say, "Well,
be
I just
said,
walked by and touched them on
Yeah,
the shoulder,"
I
and
just
that's
kinda,
it was not rubbing their
no,
shoulder.
No.
They must have seen it differently.
And it's, I can remember so many different occasions like that where you kind of want to slough it off and say, well, that person wouldn't do that and
Yeah,
mean
he
it
absolutely.
that way.
I witnessed it
That
with my own
person
eyes. He
wouldn't
did it.
Yeah, they wouldn't mean it that way. You must have felt it wrong, or that wasn't, they didn't mean that. They weren't looking down your shirt.
Yeah.
He was looking at your paper. He was looking, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've made it so that we believe there has to be this long drawn out grooming session. No, there doesn't.
No,
Be very short.
it happens really
Testing,
quickly,
yeah.
and it's all about execution of techniques, proper execution of
I
techniques.
think the more we remember that, the more we'll understand
and
be on guard.
That's right. And of course there's
Yeah.
manipulation. And of course there's the double life and pretending and all that stuff, but
Right.
it's not the way that we think of it. I think we need to get out of that mindset and say, there probably still is some grooming stuff that goes on, but primarily what they're doing is they're testing. They go in, they test, they do it really quickly. They test the kid, they test the adults. They know what they can get away with. They know what the end result is, what they're going to do to that child. They go in, they do it, and then they get out, they move on to the next victim, and they just keep doing. You ever wonder why predators have so many victims?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Because
'cause-
I think
Because they get bored,
Well,
and there's
yeah,
highly
I think
skilled,
there's a
and
thrill of
they
going
know
on
how
to
to
bigger
get in.
and better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Get
getting
into
better.
it, go on to the next one, and they just
There's a
keep.
big thrill.
It's like rinse or
And there
repeat.
is no relationship there.
No, that's
there's
right.
no building of
That's
a
exactly
relationship.
right.
Now, somebody might say, well, why do some children repeatedly get raped over and over again? I think that's simply because there's no access otherwise to other victims, or there are multiple other victims that we don't know about. And the predator knows that child's never going to say anything.
That's right.
Easy access, and they can test all kinds of things on that child.
And they'll keep it going. I mean, an abuser
Right.
will keep that abuse going as long as they can.
Right.
And then
When
once
a child reaches a certain age,
That's right.
though, what happens?
they move on to the next victim,
Right.
and
It's
over
sad,
and over and over
it's
again.
sick, it's distorted, it's ugly, it's messy, it's all of the above, and it's planned.
Yes.
And planned by the abuser. And we need to
Yes.
remember that this evil is not an accident.
No, none of it is.
No.
It's very, very intentional. So
Yes.
that's kind of an introduction into the testing versus grooming. There's a whole lot more. I do like tons of trainings on this, and I talk. In fact, tomorrow I'm doing a training online on abuse in plain sight and how abusers get away with it. It's an hour-long training, which is kind of just scratching the surface, but we really need to understand that this is incredibly common.
Right.
Not just with children. This is with adult predators who have adult victims. The number one, it was the governor's report here in Pennsylvania that they do on mandated reporting, and I forget what year it was. It was probably 2 to 4 years ago. But I read the report, and hands down by far, the most mandated reporters who made actual reports were funeral conductors.
Is that right? Wow.
And to me,
Wow.
like, I don't think that really stuck out. Well, probably, first of all, nobody reads that
Wow.
report. I think there are probably very few people who sit down
We're
and read the
interested in that,
annual
right,
governor's
yeah,
report.
right.
But I read it, and I read that, and I was like, that makes sense. To me, it made sense because I hear so many adult women who talk about these guys from church. They show up, they're standing at the casket of their loved one. We've talked about this before
Yep.
on the podcast.
Yeah.
And these grown men walk up and grope them
Yep.
while they're grieving because nobody expects
Right.
it.
Exactly. And because you are grieving, your mind will make you think that really didn't happen that
Right.
way.
That's right.
It really didn't
That's
happen
right.
that way. I wasn't thinking straight.
That's right. So, good on these funeral directors who, who do see it. And that's really curious to me because that says either they're really paying attention or they're well trained or something. I've never really researched that, but
Right.
I'm intrigued by that.
right,
Because I think
right.
it's fascinating because rarely do people see abuse in plain sight. But
Well, this is probably
This is
so
happening a lot.
blatant, Jimmy, because at a funeral, at a viewing funeral, people aren't looking for anything like that. The
no.
grieving people are in their own locked-in world.
Yep. So, I mean, if you'd like to hear more, say something in the comments. Let us know,
Right.
because I mean, seriously, this is one episode. I could do 100 episodes on this easily.
Well, there's so much more information
there's a
in
lot.
this that you wrote about that I'd love for us to unpack even more if our viewing audience, would like to hear more.
So, be aware. Know that this happens. It happens quickly, and just keep your eyes open and watch where people's hands and fingers are at all times. If you suspect anything, somebody is just tripping your intuition. Constantly watch where their hands are at all times. That's vital. Very, very important. All right. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.